They call it a black swan. Unpredictable, violent, a sudden tremor that shifts the entire world in a single heartbeat. But here is the question no one dares to ask. Are these shocks actually random? Or were they programmed by hands moving in the shadows? When markets crash, when viruses spread, when wars ignite and the entire planet is forced into a reset, the most terrifying thing isn't the event itself. It is the people who knew it was coming. And sometimes, those are the very people smiling while everything falls apart. Welcome to the Invisible Driver, the place for truth society doesn't want you to know. The first key to understanding our world is shattering the Black Swan illusion. For centuries, the smartest minds in the West were positive that all swans were white. Their entire system of logic, their biology, their worldview was built on this certainty. Why? Because they had never seen anything else. They mistook the limits of their gaze for the limits of reality. Then, they stepped foot in Australia. A single black bird didn't just break a theory. It liquidated their entire foundation of truth. Today, you are being sold a similar lie. They call it safety. They call it stability. They want you to believe that the markets, the governments, and the global systems move in a predictable, straight line. They want you to feel comfortable in the cage of logic they have built for you. But as Nassim Taleb famously warned, the events that truly move the needle of history are not the ones we prepare for. They are the outliers, the shocks, the black swans. A true black swan has 3 chilling characteristics. First, it is an outlier. It exists completely outside the realm of regular expectations. No model predicts it. No expert sees it coming. Second, it carries an extreme, world-altering impact. It doesn't just change the day, it changes the century. And third, this is the most dangerous part, a hindsight bias. After the event happens, the media, the politician, and the experts invent a story to make it seem explainable. They look back and say, "Oh, it was obvious because of X and Y." They do this to keep you asleep. They want to maintain the illusion that the world is still a predictable machine. But here is the question that haunts the corridors of power. If these events are truly unpredictable, why is it that the same group of people always seems to profit from the chaos? Is it really a surprise when a bird flies away? If the person who designed the cage is the one who unlocked the door, the lesson is simple, but brutal in an age of manufactured reality. The only way to survive is to stop trusting the white swan logic. You must become comfortable with the shadows. You must learn to look for the hands that move before the curtains rise, because while the masses are busy predicting the weather, the architects are already deep in the basement, priming the explosives for a system reset. And nowhere was this more apparent than on a clear Tuesday morning in September, when the very definition of impossible was rewritten in smoke and steel. September 11th. Most people remember the smoke, the fire, and the tragedy. But the dark strategist looks at the anomalies. The official story tells us that 2 planes brought down 3 buildings. Wait, read that again. 2 planes, 3 buildings. World Trade Center 7 was a 47-story skyscraper that was not hit by a plane. Yet, at 5:20 p.m., it collapsed into its own footprint in just under 7 seconds. It fell with the acceleration of gravity. Engineers and architects have been screaming for decades. How? A building with that structure doesn't just fold like an accordion because of office fires. It looks like a controlled demolition. It acts like a controlled demolition. Because perhaps it was a controlled demolition. But follow the money before you follow the smoke. In the days leading up to the attack, an unusual surge of put options hit the stock market. These are bets that a stock price will crash. The targets? United Airlines and American Airlines. Anonymous investors were betting millions that these specific airlines would plummet. This wasn't a lucky guess. This was insider knowledge. Someone knew the Black Swan was about to fly, and they made sure their bank accounts were ready to catch it. And then came the solution. Just weeks after the towers fell, while the American public was paralyzed by grief and terror, the government introduced the Patriot Act. This document was over 300 pages of complex, dense, legal jargon. Now ask yourself, could any government body write a world-altering law like that in just 20 days? The answer is no. The Patriot Act was sitting on a shelf, waiting for a catastrophic and catalyzing event to justify its existence. In an instant, the land of the free became the land of the watched. Privacy was traded for security. Your emails, your phone calls, your movements, all became property of the state. They didn't just use 9/11 to start a war in the desert. They used it to start a war on the privacy of every American citizen. It was the perfect blueprint. Create a crisis. Wait for the fear, and then provide the solution you had planned years ago. But if 9/11 was the birth of the surveillance state, then the year 2008 was when they perfected the art of the financial heist. If 9/11 was about controlling your body, then 2008 was about stealing your future. The world was told a fairy tale. We were told that greedy bankers and bad mortgages accidentally broke the global economy. But in the world of the dark strategist, there are no accidents, only opportunities. While millions of Americans were losing their homes and watching their life savings evaporate, a very specific group of people was getting ready for a harvest. Enter the legend of Lehman Brothers, a 158-year-old titan, allowed to collapse in a single weekend. Why? Was it because they were the worst? No. They were the sacrifice. Lehman was the black swan used to create a state of absolute blind panic. By letting them drown, the architects forced the hands of Congress to sign a blank check for $700 billion. And where did that money go? Not to the families losing their houses. It went to AIG and Goldman Sachs. Think about this. The United States Treasury was being run at the time by a former CEO of Goldman Sachs. They called it too big to fail. But that is a lie. Too big to fail is just a code word for too powerful to be accountable. It was a mechanism to use your tax dollars to bail out their gambling debts. While the middle class was being liquidated, the elite were being recapitalized. This wasn't a rescue mission. It was a restructuring. When the dust settled, the small banks were gone. The independent competitors were swallowed. Power was concentrated into fewer, darker hands. They used the crisis to vacuum up real assets, land, property, and equity for pennies on the dollar. The lesson you must burn into your mind is this: a financial crisis is not a malfunction of the system. It is the system. It is a periodic reset designed to move wealth from the bottom to the top. It is a giant delete button for the middle class and a buy button for the 1%. And just when the world thought it was recovering from this heist, They realized they needed a new kind of crisis, one that would reach inside your very home and dictate how you breathe. In the world of professional theater, they call it a dress rehearsal. You practice every move, every line, every light cue, before the curtain actually rises. In October 2019, in a high-end conference room in New York City, the global elite had their own rehearsal. It was called Event 201. This wasn't a gathering of fringe theorists. This was organized by the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the World Economic Forum. They gathered together to simulate a global pandemic. And what was the star of their simulation? A novel zoonotic coronavirus. Wait, let that sink in. They chose a coronavirus transmitted from animals to humans, starting in a high-density travel hub and spreading rapidly across the globe. Does that sound familiar? In their game, they predicted the stock market would crash. They predicted that international travel would be shut down. They even practiced how to handle misinformation by controlling the narrative on social media. And then, exactly 60 days later, the first real case of COVID-19 appeared in the real world. Statisticians will tell you that the probability of this happening by chance is mathematically impossible. It is like predicting the exact winning lottery numbers and then winning the jackpot the very next morning. This is what we call the smoking gun. They didn't just predict the virus, they predicted the response. They practiced the lockdowns. They practiced the supply chain disruptions. They practiced the great reset of the global economy before the world even knew what a social distance was. Was it a lucky guess? Or was it a pre-programmed blueprint? In the corridors of the World Economic Forum, they don't believe in luck. They believe in stakeholder capitalism and global governance. Event 201 wasn't a warning for the public. It was an instruction manual for the architects. It was the moment they verified that the system was ready for the big one. But while the elites were busy playing God in New York, the real world was about to become their laboratory. And the first experiment, turning your basic right to breathe into a government-controlled privilege. The virus was biological, but the goal was political. While the world was locked in a state of primal fear, the architects were busy installing a new operating system for humanity. They didn't just want to flatten the curve. They wanted to flatten your individuality. Think about the tools they introduced: the QR code, the vaccine passport, the digital tracking apps. Under the guise of public health, they achieved what every dictator in history could only dream of: the ability to track your every move, your every purchase, and your every physical contact in real time. In a matter of months, your fundamental right to exist in society was tied to a digital code. No code, no groceries, no code, no travel, no code, no job. They turned the land of the free into a digital plantation. And while you were being told to stay home and stay safe, a massive transfer of power was happening behind the screens. Small businesses, the backbone of the American middle class, were forced to shut down. They were labeled non-essential while the giants were allowed to thrive. Amazon, Google, and Meta saw their profits soar to heights never seen in human history. They didn't just gain money. They gained data. They learned exactly how much fear it takes to make a population comply. And then, there is Big Pharma. Companies like Pfizer and Moderna didn't just sell a product. They sold a subscription. backed by government mandates. Shielded from legal liability, they turned the human immune system into a profit center. This was the birth of biocapitalism. They proved that if you control the definition of safety, you control the population. They weaponized the air you breathe to justify the chains you wear. But don't be fooled into thinking this was just about a single virus. This was a stress test for a much larger machine. A machine that is now being moved onto the global stage to redraw the map of power itself. Because while nations were fighting over masks and mandates, a new type of war was being ignited on the borders of the East. Forget the flags. Forget the emotional speeches about democracy. If you want to see the truth, you have to look at the pipelines. Ukraine is not just a country. On the global chessboard, it is a buffer zone. A sacrificial piece in a much larger game between East and West. For decades, the nightmare of Washington was a marriage between Russian resources and German technology. If Russia and Germany became too close, the American influence over Europe would vaporize. The Nord Stream pipelines were the umbilical cord of that alliance. Cheap, reliable. Russian gas powering the industrial heart of Europe. But in late September 2022, that cord was cut. A massive explosion at the bottom of the Baltic Sea destroyed Nord Stream 1 and 2. Who did it? The media blamed everyone and no one. But ask the dark strategist's favorite question. Cui bono? Who benefits with the pipelines gone? Germany was forced to abandon its industry and buy freedom gas from the United States at 4 times the price. In a single stroke, Europe's energy independence was murdered, and they became a captive customer of the American energy giants. But the heist didn't stop at gas. Ukraine became a live fire testing ground for the military-industrial complex. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman. These names don't lose in war. They profit. Billions of tax dollars are being funneled out of American pockets, sent to Ukraine as aid, only to flow right back into the bank accounts of these weapons manufacturers. It is a perfect circular economy of death. They are not sending weapons to end the war. They are sending just enough to keep it burning. Ukraine is the anvil, and the people are the dust. While the headlines talk about heroes, the architects are busy redrawing the energy maps of the world and securing contracts for the next 50 years. This is the ultimate managed crisis. A war that drains Russia, enslaves Europe to American energy, and keeps the factories of the defense giants running 24/7. But who owns these giants? Who owns the gas companies, the weapons factories, and the very banks that fund the reconstruction? To find the answer, we have to look past the governments and into the shadows of the two entities that own almost everything. We have talked about politicians, generals, and CEOs. But now, we must talk about the people who own them. If you look at the top shareholders of Pfizer, they are BlackRock and Vanguard. If you look at the owners of Lockheed Martin and Boeing, they are BlackRock and Vanguard. If you look at who owns the mainstream media outlets that tell you what to think, it is the same names, BlackRock and Vanguard. Together, these two entities manage over $15 trillion in assets. To put that in perspective, that is more than the GDP of almost every nation on Earth. Combined, they are the shadow giants. They don't run for office. They don't need your vote, because they own the infrastructure of your entire reality. But their true power isn't just in their bank accounts. It is in their brain. Deep inside the headquarters of BlackRock sits a machine called Aladdin. Aladdin is a massive AI algorithm, a central nervous system for global finance. It monitors every trade, every political shift, and every natural disaster. 24/7. It processes data that no human mind could comprehend. This machine doesn't just predict the future. It optimizes it. When Aladdin sees a risk, it moves trillions of dollars in a heartbeat. It can trigger a market crash or a surge in oil prices before a single headline is written. It is the ultimate black swan detector. And here is the dark truth. If you can predict a crisis with a machine, you can also ensure that you are the only one prepared to profit when it hits. Think about the cycle we have uncovered. A war starts. BlackRock's defense stocks go up. A pandemic hits. Vanguard's pharmaceutical holdings skyrocket. A nation goes into debt. They are the ones who buy the bonds and dictate the laws. They are the invisible driver of the global vehicle. They own the gas, they own the engine, and they own the road. While you are busy arguing over left versus right, these giants are playing a different game. They aren't looking for followers. They are looking for assets. But their final frontier isn't land or oil. It is something much more personal. It is the very concept of value itself. They are preparing for a world where you no longer own your money, a world where the invisible driver can turn off your ability to survive with a single click. Welcome to the era of the programmable human. We have seen the past, and we have unmasked the present. But what is the next black swan? The architects don't just want to watch you. They want to control your ability to trade. To do that, they must kill the one thing that gives you financial anonymity: cash. We are currently witnessing the final stages of the war on cash. Enter the CBDC, central bank digital currency. Do not mistake this for Bitcoin or crypto. Bitcoin was designed to be decentralized, outside the reach of the state. CBDCs are the exact opposite. They are the ultimate instrument of government surveillance. Imagine a world where every single dollar you spend is tracked in a central database, but it goes deeper than tracking. This is programmable money. In a CBDC system, the government can put an expiration date on your savings to force you to spend and stimulate the economy. They can restrict what you buy, try to buy too much meat. Denied. Your carbon footprint is too high this month. Try to buy a firearm, student. Blocked. Try to donate to a political candidate they don't like. Account frozen. This is the integration of the banking system with a social credit score. Think back to the lockdowns. Remember how they could stop you from going to the park? Now, imagine they can stop you from buying food because you posted a controversial opinion on the internet. The next black swan will likely be a cyber attack or a banking collapse so violent, so chaotic, that the masses will beg for a solution. And the solution will be the digital wallet. They will tell you it is for your convenience. They will tell you it is to stop crime. But the truth is, a cashless society is a powerless society. If you don't have the physical token of value in your hand, you don't own your labor. You are merely a subscriber to your own life, and the invisible driver has the power to cancel your subscription with a single keystroke. This is not a conspiracy theory. The infrastructure is being built right now by the very giants we discussed, BlackRock and the central banks. They are moving the world toward a final bottleneck, a point where all human activity must pass through their digital gates. But how do they make us accept this? How do they make a free people walk into their own prison? To understand that, we must look at the psychological blueprint they use for every single crisis. By now, you are probably asking yourself, how do they get away with it? How can a free people watch their rights, their wealth, and their privacy vanish and do nothing? The answer lies in a psychological weapon called the Hegelian Dialectic, in the shadows of power. It is known by a much simpler name: problem, reaction, solution. It is a three-step dance that has shaped the last century of human history. Step 1. Create a problem. The architects trigger a crisis. It could be a financial collapse, a global pandemic, or a sudden war. This is the black swan they let out of the cage. It is designed to be violent, shocking, and loud. Step 2. Manufacture a reaction. The media machines pump out a constant stream of fear. They show you the falling towers, the rising death tolls, the empty grocery shelves. They drive the public into a state of primal anxiety. And then, the masses do exactly what the architects planned. They scream for help. They beg the government to do something to make the nightmare stop. Step 3. Provide the solution. This is the masterstroke. The government offers a solution that would have been unthinkable just months before, in times of peace. No American would accept the Patriot Act in times of stability. No one would accept a global lockdown in times of prosperity. No one would trade their cash for a digital tracking code. But in the middle of a managed chaos, the people don't just accept these chains. They welcome them. They trade their liberty for a false sense of security. This is how the invisible driver moves the vehicle of society. They don't force you into the prison. They make you afraid of the outside world until you run into the cell yourself and lock the door. Every event we have discussed today, 2001, 2008, 2020, they all follow this exact blueprint. The problem is the black swan. The reaction is the panic. The solution is the reset. It is a machine designed to manufacture consent. It is a factory that turns your fear into their power. But once you see the pattern, the spell begins to break. Once you understand the dialectic, you realize that the chaos isn't a sign that the system is failing. It is a sign that the system is working, is exactly as intended. So, the question is no longer what is happening. The question is, what are you going to do now that you know? We have peered into the darkness, and we have seen the hands that pull the strings. But the goal of this journey is not to leave you in despair. It is to make you anti-fragile. To be anti-fragile means you don't just survive the shock. You thrive because of it. When the architects release the next black swan, the masses will freeze in fear. They will look to the screens for instructions. They will wait for the solution to be handed to them in exchange for their freedom. But you will be different. You have seen the script, and once you see it, you can no longer be controlled by it. The first step to breaking the script is decentralization. Stop relying on their systems for your truth. Build your own network of information. Seek out the invisible driver in every headline. The second step is physical reality. In a world of programmable digital codes and paper promises, own things that are real. Land, skills, gold, and most importantly, community. The more self-sufficient you are, the less power they have to reset your life. But the most critical step Do not give them your fear. Fear is the fuel for the Hegelian Dialectic. Without your panic, their problem has no teeth. Without your desperation, their solution has no market. We are entering a decade of manufactured turbulence. They will try to divide us. They will try to track us. They will try to manage our chaos. But the invisible driver cannot steer a soul that refuses to be a passenger. If you are ready to stop being a pawn in their game, if you are ready to see the world for what it truly is, then join us. Subscribe to the Invisible Driver here. We don't just report the news, we decode the agenda. Hit the notification bell, because in the coming months, the truth society doesn't want you to know will become your only shield. Before you go, I have a question for you. Look at the world right now. The headlines. The tension. What do you think is the next black swan they are preparing to release? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start the conversation that they are trying to silence. The script is written, but the ending? That belongs to you. I am the Invisible Driver, and the truth is finally in your hands.